I wanted to start this critique with just showing the set that I built as an example. There's a couple, shots in this that you can see, sort of a simple interior and living room, and we can see the perspective view and kind of look around here. Um, so what you'll notice is that, I've only built what the camera's going to see, and it only needs to sort of work for certain kind of angles. I mean, within this, you could do a lot of different stuff, but it's when you're building a set, you only really need to design and build what the camera will see. I also later show this as kind of an iconic example of the set you want to build, which is to say it's like a stage set. It's sort of like you need to do the back and the sides, but you don't need to do, a fully 3D from every angle environment, just what the camera will see. In video games, you have to build something that the character could walk anywhere, but we're just going to do a short animation, and so it's only what the camera is going to see. And so I wanted you to see this just to give you an example of what I'll be looking for you to do when you build your set. Now, it doesn't have to be indoors, and it doesn't have to be a living room. It could be outdoors, but you want to find a way to kind of bound the set so that there's not like a horizon line to worry about, and things going off infinitely in the distance. So find a way to block off the horizon line with a hill or a building or these kinds of things. And just think about different angles you'd like to show, and only build the parts of the set that you'll see from those angles, and only design. Well, you mean you can do have more inspiration and rough sketches of designs, but when you get into some more of the detailed design of your set, just be thinking about the parts of the set that the camera will actually see, and make sure the background is fully filled in, and the background can be fully filled in if it's not kind of looking off into infinity. If there's things like hills in the background, or a building, or rocks or whatever, something to kind of block your view of the infinite plane. um, so first up we have Andrea, and first of all, what a beautiful illustration. I mean, this is such a just a great looking illustration. It's really impressive. um, and it's good example, because in a sense it's what I just was talking about, in that it's just sort of showing the parts of the camera view and the few different sides of it. So I think, certainly this is very doable. It's useful. It gives the character somewhere to be and somewhere to work with. I think what's not necessarily, I mean, I think this circle was in an attempt to replace the clouds, although the circle thing doesn't really explain what's kind of supporting the weight of the character, where I understand the cloud in a more sort of fantasy way. You can imagine it kind of supporting the character by kind of enveloping her and supporting her. So, I mean, it seems like you were very much inclined to want to do the cloud thing, and certainly it's possible and doable. So, it's just that I don't really cover, creating volumes or rendering volumes in this class, and a cloud would typically be done with a volume. So, it's either going to require you to do your own kind of research on that, or do something that's kind of using the tools that are covered, which means it will result in something a little less cloud-like, a little less kind of cottony and fluffy, and those kinds of things. So I think going in with that awareness, you can make some design decisions. It's you've got an interesting sort of prop here, and that'll be good for you know modeling, but there isn't a whole lot of detail to model in texture. So I mean, I suppose in that sense, then you could put your efforts into kind of the research and development on how you want to do your cloud, rather than making a whole bunch of models and textures. So it seems to kind of go well with your concept and piece. So I think It's funny she's actually eating a Facebook like. That's I like that. That's really good. So yeah, very clever, beautifully illustrated. It's got a lot of potential. Not a lot of detailed models, but there's enough between this thing and that. And then of course, if you decide to do the cloud, so um, yeah, very nice work. Next up is Lindsay, and as I mentioned, had some concerns with using the 3D dummy for this class, as far as kind of limiting the modeling part of the project and not having facial expressions and those kinds of things. I think the artwork you've gathered for an environment is all good. I think that you need to start narrowing this down into an environment design, which is to say, specifically from a specific point of view, this is what I want to model exactly. So I think good inspirational images, but you kind of need to turn this into actual environment design, narrow it down so that we see what exactly you're going to be modeling just from you know kind of an individual point of view. Next up is Mary. I believe this is a photo from the Natural History Museum in London. I actually live in London and go there quite a lot, so it's an absolutely stunningly beautiful building. I think that this is sort of not sufficient for this assignment to just kind of post an individual photo, because I think you kind of need to think through, like, what are you going to model? Where is your character going to be? Do you need to model, from this point up? Do you need all of that space? How much of it will the camera be? Will the character be standing on the floor down here? And if so, then we need to do kind of these areas. So I think it's also fairly actually big and complex, and how much of this do you need to model or want to model. So I think you need to kind of do a little more work, narrow down what set you really want to build, what do you think the camera's going to see, and then really design that. Think about what prop your character could use. So I'd like to see more thought and development on this stuff, and sort of create a environment that's going to work well for the class and for your character to act inside of. Keep it simple, and um, yeah, and then take it from there. So let's see some more reference and some actual design work on what your environment is going to look like. Next up is Amber. Looks like you have a pretty good description. The idea of the temple, and you have some nice reference images for a temple. I think that you have this kind of outdoors grand open environment, and then that sort of raises questions about how you deal with the background. I mean, one thing I mentioned was trying not to do something that has sort of a kind of an infinite background or horizon line to sort of fill that in. And if you end up doing shots like this, it becomes like a lot to deal with, like all these different mountains and the trees and stuff on the mountain and all these different structures. So, or if we're kind of doing more of a close-up of the temple, it's a different story, but then you have to sort of still think about this like broad wide open background and how you deal with that. So I just think in the design, again, kind of really start, you've got some good reference, you've got a good general concept, but really start narrowing down just precisely what it is that you're going to want to build, and what you think the camera's going to see, and then just be building that, and what the character, how it might interact with the environment. Next up is Ekaterina, and I think this is much more on the right track. I mean, I could definitely see like your small paper character interacting in here. Like I said, I had some concerns about creating the model of that character and it being working well for this class. But as far as the environment's concerned, you have this kind of reasonable to do limited area of a room. I don't imagine you'll be building a whole separate character of this man, but I'm just imagining the shelves and the books and the background and the light and some of these other details. This is kind of a very doable environment, and you could get in here, and I think a lot of this will hinge on the detail, getting kind of a lot of nice details of the book. You have a pencil. You might think of some other props, other things that might end up sitting on a shelf, a paperweight, a snow globe, who knows what, something to break it up so that it's not just books and pencils, although that might be sufficient. But yeah, I think that this is the right idea for an environment, assuming you're going to go with the small kind of miniature paperman, which, as I said, I had some other concerns with. But um, yeah, this looks good. Next up is Francis. Francis, describes a whole scene there of, a spaceship and coming down in a canyon and, finding a ball to play with, and it's sort of a whole story here. It's many. What you've described is many times more than the amount we'll be animating in this class. Kind of what I want you to focus on quality rather than quantity. So we'll just do kind of a very short animation sequence that couldn't possibly include everything you described. That said, I think it's great to have a concept and a backstory, and you can sort of pick a moment out of that whole thing to actually animate. So essentially, it seems to me that the environment is this canyon area, and looking at the various images, a shot like this, and it looks like you've got your own kind of version of it here. I think this one's looking a little more sort of flat. I sort of like the various areas of light and dark, and the kind of a little bit more depth and going on here, because you have stuff closer, further, 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 further. Kind of each sort of bulging thing moves away. Whereas here you kind of just have two levels of depth. So I would, I like that you're kind of drawing your inspiration from this image, and that's great. Or images like it, but I think what part of what's attractive about this is the different areas of light and dark and the different kind of phases of depth, so that it's not just sort of just a foreground and a background, but it's got all these kind of intermediate steps as well. This is interesting too, a little different, but yeah, definitely get foreground, and you could like kind of winds through. It's a very nice photo. So yeah, good inspiration, good images. Might flesh this out a little bit more, get more depth, get a little bit more going on. Think about the ground plane, a little bit more what that's going to look like. And again, the backdrop is very flat, so that think about how that could be not so flat. It could be at more of an angle, and there could be more kind of coming out there, and not such like a real straight sort of background line there. Maybe you can break that up some. Next up is Ariana, who has the idea of a spaceship. I think that in general this is the right idea, where it's a kind of a limited sort of bounded environment, sort of like the living room I showed you that I had done. There's an area for the character to move in. I think you might think about. I think the drawings leave a lot to be desired. I think they lack detail and kind of a clear sense of perspective, so they're pretty rough. But I think as a choice to do a environment, kind of the spaceship interior thing is a good one. Um, I think one thing something like this has is you've got a door to move through here. You've got some more floor space, which you could kind of pull back a little bit and see more floor. And I think doing stuff where the character can be standing and moving around will give you a few more options. Whereas your drawings, this just includes the table and doesn't really give us much foreground. Although I suppose it's similar to this. You may just want to do this, and maybe fill in some of the areas that aren't seen to give yourself a little bit more room. You've got this whole rug here. It could just sort of extend out further. Maybe give yourself this wall. Maybe give us a little bit more going off to the screen left. But in a way, maybe you would just want to do this room rather than your sketch. I think, it doesn't give the detail you need. But something like this gives you all kinds of stuff, like looking at how the door is shaped and these different angles and other, there's so, and like little indentations like that and these little extra panels and video screens, various stuff stacked up. So there's just a rich set of things to work with something like that. So I'd rather see you take an image like this and model that than try to do something from your drawings, which are just sort of a kind of a really super simplified and kind of sketchy version of something like this. So think about that. Think about kind of straight up just using the photo, and also think about what your character might do and giving it some room to move around. Next up is Natalie, who has this idea of like a polka dot room and the polka dots taking over. I would encourage you to do something a little bit more, I guess, simple and kind of, I suppose, conservative, because I think the main idea of the environment is to have the kind of environment speak for itself. And I think, without the dots, it's a very sort of simple room, like a big box. And I think, having polka dots emerging and taking over the space, it's a cool idea, and that could be an animation in its own right. But the idea for this class is to have a 3D character be physically in a space, and the thing that we're supposed to be looking at is the 3D character and focusing on them. And if there's like thousands of colored dots moving around, it'll be sort of too much happening on the screen and won't really pay attention to the character, which is the main focus really. So I would back off of this whole polka dot scene and just go for kind of a simpler, if you wanted to do kind of a living room thing, I think that's a better idea. I mean, and it's very interesting and conceptual, and I like the reference material, so I like that sort of thinking. But I think for the practicalities of what we're trying to do in this class, I don't think it'll be the best choice. So maybe try something different, and then definitely do some kind of sketches and design work. This next one, doing a grotto, I think is I think it's interesting. I think that doing these kind of fully natural environments are challenging, more so than one might guess. To get them to look believable, they're usually done in these sort of fairly procedural ways, and sometimes you have a kind of a very carefully sculpted rocks. The other thing that I'd be a little concerned about this is it very much hinges on the water in the shot, and we won't be covering how to do water. That's kind of a whole world of its own, so we won't be covering that in this class. So I would say that this is looking a little sparse right now for the design, and I would kind of encourage you to stay away from water. I mean, one possibility would be to have a set of angles where you imply the water without having the water in the shot. And what I mean by that, for example, is you could have that kind of the sort of caustic lighting that water forms, a kind of animated dappling of light that you get from reflected off of rippling water, could then be a source of light in the scene to sort of imply the water in there without actually showing in this shot. Because again, I wouldn't want you to have to deal with trying to do water for this, because it's just too much. But I'm not saying you can't do a natural environment. I just think that it's definitely got its challenges, and as always, reference is the key, but so much of this is the sort of the shapes and the texture. And I guess I would just say don't underestimate sort of the amount of sculpting and shaping it takes to do something like a natural rocky environment and do it well. You can't just kind of throw up a few simple shapes. There's a lot going on in something like this, and if you try to sort of shortcut the detail, then it doesn't tend to look like much. So I'm not saying you can't try to do this. I'm just sort of going for something more architectural and geometrical is a lot more. It's a better path for a successful environment, given that there's not a huge portion of this class is actually going to be spent on the environment, and we don't really get into kind of full-on sculpting, and by sculpting I mean sort of ZBrush style sculpting of stuff. So anyway, think about doing some more of something a little bit more architectural or simple, um, and also think about trying to do it in such a way, if you're going to do something more like this, that there's not water included in the ship. Next up is Elena, and the idea of a bathroom, good. The idea of shaving cream and razor, fine. But let's see some more of the bathroom than just this very narrow portion of it. Pull out a little bit wider to give your character some room to act in. Maybe we see part of a bathtub. Maybe we see part of a toilet, sink. You know, other bathroom items. Just so sort of, I would say, kind of pull out a little bit and design more of the bathroom. I feel like this is too narrow and limited of an environment, and in a sense, it seems like a stretch to call that kind of a design environment, because it's such a narrow portion of it. So doing a bathroom, fine and good, but let's pull out, and it certainly should be no problem getting loads of reference for a bathroom. I mean, you could go no further than your own home if you want to model your own bathroom. And I actually encourage that kind of thing. Like if the reference material is something you can actually like walk around in and see and touch and see from every angle, that's a great. That's the ultimate reference material. So modeling your own bathroom could be a great idea. But I'm not saying you have to do a full 360 degrees of the bathroom. In fact, I'm not encouraging that at all, but just a wider view. So for example, you have at least the option of seeing your character from head to toe, so that the camera will be wide enough for that. What I think is working about this environment is, it's a sort of a simple, limited space. The view outside could be done with sort of a backdrop image, and getting a space painting wouldn't be a hard thing to find, and just throwing that in the background. But on the other hand, I feel like it's maybe a little bit too limited, because it's the kind of thing you could do in 20 minutes or something. It just doesn't leave a lot of room for. So I think maybe if this is a character that's living in some kind of space station or whatever it is, spaceship, flesh it out, give it more signs of being lived in or used. What kind of amenities do they need? What kind of controls? So I think fine to go with this theme and this idea, but try to flesh out the detail of the space, the space that the character's in more, and by that I mean the room that the character's in, and objects in the room, and architectural details, and those kinds of things. So just flesh it out some. Next is Yao Nan, and this is really good. This is very much the sort of the idea of an environment I would have in mind. I think that you might need to pull the camera out a little bit more and see okay, what's up here, and so get a little bit more height on this at least would be a good idea. I think that you're doing smart things, for example, repeating cabinet doors, repeating pots and pans, repeating bottles. That's going to make this more doable. That said, I think you could benefit from more detail. What might they have set on the counter? Perhaps there's some books on these shelves. Perhaps there's some other kind of different kitchen implements people leave out, or who knows, a microwave, toaster, oven, would have the various things people might have on the counter. So I think it's good. It's the right idea. I think it could benefit from a little bit more detail and props, but definitely the right concept for what we're looking for from an environment. And then some really nice reference here. Especially I think kind of something like this looks like it's a sort of a limited color palette, which is a good thing. The colors aren't, there's a lot of copper and browns, and grays and nothing. There's a couple little spots of red here and there, but the colors stay like within a reasonable palette. Oh, and yeah, and this is so I would, for as far as what to put in the I wouldn't clutter things up as much as this, but you have the kind of paper towel roll, you have the knife rack, you've got the kind of the implement jar here, a bowl of eggs. How nice does that look? I think draw some inspiration from your images to sort of flesh out your kitchen a little bit more. Fruit, some simple pieces of fruit could be a good choice. A stack of plates, who knows what. But yeah, get some more detail. Um, yeah, so good work. Definitely the right idea. And yeah, like I said, just flesh it out a little bit more and maybe kind of show us a little bit more height as well. Next up is Vincent, and yeah, good reference images. I like the various kind of prison images and the you know interesting kind of brickwork here, and crack in the wall that happens along the bricks is kind of cool, and interesting lighting reference. And yeah, so there's a lot of good inspirational images here. Very nice sketch that shows some nice perspective here. I think looks good, and I think that you might focus in on. Oh, it looks like you've already done some modeling as well, which is amazing. Sort of jumping ahead. I think that, and we can take a look at that in a second. I think that I would probably make the cell a little. Well, maybe not. I mean, I might make it a little bigger than this to give your character some room to move, but there's nice little details in here. The simple sink, the little vent along the floor, the damage, these shelves, those kind of things. A very depressing, kind of pitiful jail cell, isn't it? Let's take a quick look at the My. So yeah, it's great that you're already well on the way. I think that there is kind of the issue, sort of depending on how you deal with the camera angle, you may want to duplicate it a few more times to get, the option to have kind of that longer hallway, if you want to be able to do that. But you can also, if you end up with a shot that's more like this, you may not need that. You can go sort of, that kind of far out without having to worry about it. But maybe think about what's on the floor, details on the floor, adding some hinges and kind of locks to the cellar door. I think the actually these are quite a lot bigger than that reference image, so which is fine. It'll give your character some room to move around. I think adding the feet on the bed and the something like the sink, maybe a toilet, and other little, I don't know, books on a bookshelf, and I don't know, whatever it is people keep in prison cells, getting some more of the details in is going to be nice. But yeah, very impressive that you've already gotten this far. Next up is Shane, and some good inspirational images for a hallway for an alien to walk down. I think they're all good. I mean, they use repetition, which will give you some efficiency for modeling. They're all also, I would look for opportunities for imperfections and a sense of it being kind of lived in and used rather than this kind of pristine and perfect environment. So think about that. Maybe, little hatches that people have, a little storage areas, or maybe some kind of debris, or some wires. I don't know. Something to so it's not kind of this pristinely perfect look. I think would be nice. And I think the story you describe, again, like I said in the previous one, it's great to have this sort of thought out, kind of full backstory. But what you've described there is a little bit more than well, it's a lot more than I think we'll be able to do in the class. So you'll probably have to kind of pick like a few moments from that story rather than doing the whole thing when we get into animation, and that's fine. Right now we're just focused on the environment. So again, like the idea of a hallway, a spaceship, that's all good. What can you do to add some kind of story, some lived-in look, some idea that it's actually being used and that it's imperfect? So I think boxing ring is that's a fine sort of choice, but I think the next step is it can't just be kind of floating in black space, right? Like what's the background? What's behind it? Is there kind of brick walls? Are there any props in between? Is there, I don't know, a punching bag hanging down somewhere, a water cooler, or some kind of industrial looking back brick wall with some kind of dirty windows up high on it or something? Who knows? So, or is it this is a stadium? Although that's you're not going to be populating it with a bunch of other characters. So keep in mind that you the props. So I think a boxing ring is a fine and good idea, but a boxing ring in what environment? I mean, in a way, it's almost like yes, you could argue that the boxing ring is the environment or is part of the environment, but it's almost just like a prop in an environment. It's like what's the environment that that boxing ring is sitting in. So that'll think to be the thing to take it forward, to be able to kind of come up with a concept with that and get some reference for that. Everything that's in the shot that's not the character, not the boxing ring, the backdrop. Yeah, I've tried opening this file and I'm unable to open it. It's awfully big for a JPEG, so maybe you could shrink it down a little bit first and then re-upload it. So without a description, with only this image, it doesn't give us too much to go on, except that you're doing some kind of forested scene, which I think is fine. I think think about what you can do to the terrain to make it a little interesting. Maybe there's a path through it. Maybe there's a boulder. Maybe there's kind of a hillside behind, so you don't have to worry about kind of things going in the distance. It is possible to render with some environment fog. To get that kind of depth that you've got going on there. I do like this. It's a nice image, and the colors, the saturated colors in the foreground going to the blue in the background is pretty impressive. So that could be a good concept. Later, when we work on the environment, we'll be demonstrating a sort of an easy way to generate trees which you could use. So it's all very doable. Just kind of think about what your character will do and how they'll be interacting. Realize that it looks like there's a lot of leaves on the ground, and we won't be trying to have the character kind of kick around and move leaves because that's sort of a whole little mini project of its own. So maybe there's a little clearing, or maybe there's a path that the character's on that goes through the woods, and I think that would help kind of break things up and direct your eye anyway. So think about what you could do to kind of flesh this out and do some drawings, and I'll be interested to see what your other image was as well.